Good evening. We'll call the Tuesday, May 15, 2018 meeting of the Everett Planning Commission to order, beginning with the roll call, please.
Chair Holland.
Here.
Commissioner Beck.
Here.
Commissioner Tisdall.
Here.
Commissioner Zelinski.
Here.
Commissioner Lavra.
Here.
Commissioner Yanasak.
Here.
Commissioner McGinn. Commissioner Lark.
Here.
We have two sets of minutes, it looks like, for approval by the Planning Commission tonight. The first one was the April 3rd, 2017 minutes. Is there any discussion or comments or motion on those minutes?
Chair Holland, I would just mention that at the last meeting where these minutes were presented to us, neither you nor Commissioner Dunn were here, and since both of you were the prime participants in the conversation about the alternate voting procedure, the rest of us decided to table the motion on the minutes.
Okay.
Now, you're here, but Commissioner Dunn is not here, so.
Is there any, Alan, is there any reason to move these minutes forward for approval right now, or should we wait again? I mean, I have some comments I can make on that, but I just thought I'd ask whether or not it's pressing to get these things.
I don't see a problem with approving the minutes, but I guess making a note that you may want to have a follow-up discussion about alternate voting in the future, just so that you can dispense with the minutes and have another discussion about that at the appropriate time.
Sure, I think that's a great idea, especially since we have new commissioners. And I think one of the comments that Commissioner Dunn had was that, however, my statement read in the minutes, but that was a true and accurate statement, so regardless if it was correct or incorrect, it shouldn't be changed in the minutes, in my opinion, but I'll let the rest of the Planning Commission weigh in on that. But yeah, if we could maybe set that for a future agenda item to talk about the alternate voting, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll try and do that when we'll have 8 or 9 commissioners, hopefully all 9.
Any other discussion or motions on those minutes?
I'll move approval of the April 3rd minutes.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay, call for the vote.
Commissioner McGinn. Commissioner Yanasak.
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra. Commissioner Zelinski.
Yes?
Commissioner Tisdall.
Yes.
Commissioner Beck.
Yes.
Chair Holland.
Yes. So the next set of minutes was from the April 17th meeting. Any comments or corrections or discussion on those? Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
I would move to forward those minutes.
Second?
Second. I'll second.
No discussion, call for the vote, please.
Commissioner McGinn. Commissioner Yanasak.
Abstain.
Commissioner Lavra.
Yes.
Commissioner Zelinski.
Yes?
Commissioner Tisdall.
Yes.
Commissioner Beck.
Yes.
Chair Holland.
Yes. Is there any committee reports from the commissioners this evening? Commissioner Lark? Seeing none. Commissioner McGinn? No? Commissioner Yanasak?
Nope.
No? Commissioner Lark? Don't see none. Commissioner Beck? No?
We're boring.
Okay, nothing tonight. How about staff?
Alan Giffen, Planning Director, just wanted to let you know that the City Council will hold a public hearing on your recommendation regarding the number of retail marijuana stores tomorrow night at their meeting at 6:30. That's it.
Great, thank you. Well, this is an opportunity for anyone in the audience that wanted to address the Planning Commission on anything that's not on the agenda this evening. If so, please come forward. Seeing none. We do have one item on the agenda tonight with several, well, I guess 8 different future actions at a public hearing. This isn't a public hearing night, but if you do plan on testifying to the commission tonight, please make sure to fill out the sign-in sheet here. With that, I'll turn it over to Alan or Dave.
David?
Good evening, David Stahlheim, Long Range Planning Manager, and tonight we're going to walk through the legislative package that we've provided to you. Hopefully the screen will come up. There we go. So this is about Metro Everett. I'm going to walk through the proposed actions that are detailed also in tonight's agenda. There's basically 4 different groupings of actions that we're looking at doing. First off, there's planning documents, then there's development regulations, then there's local project review procedures, and then there's amendments to the State Environmental Policy Act, the local ordinance, the SEPA ordinance. So in the planning actions, the 2 planning actions are, first is to adopt the new Metro Everett Subarea Plan. And so the Planning Commission members have been given a bound copy dated May 8th. We'll walk through some of those, the changes in there. But part of that adoption will also include repealing of 2 existing sub-area plans, and that being the downtown plan and the Everett Station District Plan. So when we draft the resolutions for you, we'll include repealing those 2 sub-area plans. The second action is that as a result of the sub-area plan, we have to go into the existing citywide plan and do some amendments for internal consistency. And so item number 2 in the action is to amend the existing citywide plan. For development regulation actions, action number 3 is there's 2 new zoning chapters that we're proposing for both Metro Everett and also the core residential area, or the acronym shortened CRA. Those 2 chapters include Chapter 19, which is Metro Uses, and Chapter 20, Development Standards. And so, again, in your 3-ring binder, all these different actions, you got the plan, but action number 2 is behind tab 2, action number 3 is behind tab 3. In action number 3, and Kathy, did we get those updated pages? Okay. So we did have a mistake that I made, that I did not replace map number 20-6 in there, and so all your pages should be replaced, which is page 29 in chapter 20. The map should be dated 5/11. For those that go to our website, the document is also dated 5/11, and the only change is the map with the incentive heights within Metro Everett area. Number 4 action is off-street parking, loading, and access, and that will include, first off, replacing the existing Chapter 34 with new. Want to make sure that people are aware that this is not just a Metro Everett thing, but it applies citywide. And so the distinction on this one is it's a citywide amendment of replacing the existing Chapter 34 with a new chapter. Actions number 5 and 6 are really what we call kind of internal consistency or cleanup ordinances. And so action number 5 is consistency and coordination with all the Metro actions as a result of all the new zoning chapters, the removal of the core residential and other overlays, a whole bunch of things in there. And so we have amendments to numerous titles within the existing Everett Municipal Code. So titles 2, 3, 8, 13, 16, 18, 19, 20, and 46. Not all these titles typically are things that the Planning Commission reviews. Usually what you're involved in is really 18 and 19 and 20 to some respect. But since it's all tied to this package, we're bringing it all together because it'll end up being in one ordinance with the City Council. Action number 6 is amending 3 titles, and this is related to the consistency and coordination with the off-street parking. So titles 13, 18, and 19. And again, these are because we're moving a lot of the off-street parking, loading, and access all into one chapter. What this does is does all the cleanup of all those actions. So just kind of go back and the thing that the meat of these things are really in actions number 3 and 4. That's where the substance is. And so rather than have one ordinance that includes all the cleanup and all the new stuff, we thought it was easier for the public to really look at the meat of the new things in actions number 3 and 4. And so those are really where all the new substantive standards are. And number 5 and 6 is the cleanup that we need to do to make all this new stuff work. Action number 7 is in Title 15. We have what we call the local project review. And so this is the level of review for Metro actions. We briefed the Planning Commission on this a couple meetings ago. So this is for the different levels of permits, what provides notice to the neighbors, notice on site, things like that for the different Metro actions. Same thing for the off-street parking. One additional thing that was new statute, legislative authority, I think from 2 years ago, the legislature authorized this city to move the final plat approval from the city council to another body. And so we're proposing to move that to staff. City council is not involved in the preliminary plat approvals. It's a hearing examiner. Right? Or staff sometimes. And so this would move, since the city council is never involved in that, this would move that to a staff level review. Also, there was an error that was put forth quite a while ago tied to other changes in that the public hearing request for short subdivisions is that would eliminate that public hearing request for short subdivisions. That's an opportunity in statute for subdivisions and not for short subdivisions. And so working on cleaning that part up. Finally is the 8th action is amendment of our local SEPA ordinance. Would add a new infill exemption from SEPA. This would be applicable only to Metro Everett only. It would exempt from review up to 200 dwelling units, mixed-use development, and commercial development up to 65,000 square feet, excluding retail. And so this is allowance under state law for infill development. And so that's our 8th action. So for the Planning Commission, prior to the public hearing, what we haven't done for you yet is the draft resolutions. And so we'll have that for you before the public hearing, and also our compliance with the State Environmental Policy Act. And so those two things are still items that staff is working on, and so we'll have that to you prior to your public hearing. So I want to spend a little time, and we've gone through quite a few work sessions on this. Thanks to the Planning Commission for all your diligence on this, and the public as well. But so we've had different versions of the drafts that have been out there, and so we've had really good input from the public, and also some internal reviews that we've had. So I kind of want to walk through, and you have a memo that covers all this stuff, but walk through, particularly for the public, the changes that are in the draft that are before you right now. So first off is the Metro Everett Plan changes with the maps. So we've had 2 requests in particular. We had the Juckets, south of Pacific, had requests to go into urban mix zone. There were some other property owners in that area, a couple streets, but primarily off of Oaks. Requested to go to urban mixed, and so we have amended those maps to include that area. Second is that Mr. Bargreen came and asked for his property, which was designated as urban light industrial, to go to equivalent to the B3 zone, which is really the urban mixed zone, and so we've changed the boundaries of that to have an urban mixed zone on that as well. Our initial drafts for the parking zones, parking zone A in Metro Everett, we have changed that boundary to expand it to the West Marine Drive area, and so it goes further to the west than we originally had proposed, and this is an area that does not require any parking for non-residential development. Similarly, we've gone to the other side, the east side of Broadway. We've designated Broadway as a transit-oriented development corridor. Future light rail in there, and so having that area also as parking zone A. For heights, we've had some input in the Norton Grand neighborhood, and so we've lowered the areas around the Providence South campus. The incentive height is lowered to 6 floors near the Norton Grand neighborhood in that area. So it was 7 floors, and we've reduced that down to 6 floors, which is consistent with the height of the Providence campus building. In the Metro Everett Plan changes in text, we've eliminated the port compatibility. That's been a subject of some input that the Planning Commission and staff has received, as well as council and the mayor's office have received. And so we've eliminated maps and text relating to the port compatibility. And it's a topic that we plan to take up with a joint land use study with the Navy to look at Navy compatibility with the Navy and with the port down the road. We didn't really have any policies in the plan on Rucker Avenue and trying to look at the improvements that north of Pacific Avenue in particular is trying to slowing traffic down. So we've added a policy back in that looks at traffic calming along Rucker Avenue in that area to try to make sure that we slow the traffic down in that area. We had gotten input from Sound Transit about some of our language about light rail and the light rail station within Metro Everett. And so we've amended some of the language around the light rail, but not the real principles that we had in the concept drawings and things like that. We did add some fee reduction policy at a request of our economic development consultant, looking at other things to reduce fees to try to incentivize development within the core for commercial and other uses. Same thing, our consultant asked to add some implementation actions which had to do with telling the Everett story and surplusing any city property to try to incentivize development within the Metro Everett core. And so those are in our economic development chapter and our implementation appendix. In Chapter 19, Metro Everett uses, again, we've implemented the plan changes in the maps. We added a clause that's currently in the B3 zone that allows the use of basements, even though for some uses that aren't allowed within the existing chapter there, that sometimes basement uses can be compatible in those areas. And so we added that, and hopefully Jeff catches that our battery's running low. So it looks like it's plugged in. Well, the briefing may be quick. Must not be any power, Jeff. And we'll go until it runs out. How about that? And also we added one of the things that came up when we were looking at some of the issues in the historic overlay is added that single family and duplex will be allowed in historic overlays. Right now, that's a use that's prohibited, is single family and duplex within Metro Everett area, the urban residential. So we've added that as an allowance within the Metro Everett area. So I just got this coming up now. Thanks, Jeff. Chapter 20, development changes. Again, implemented the plan changes for the maps. We did some reorganization of the articles, same things, but the way that kind of flows for, at least for staff and people in the development community, is that the articles were kind of out of order to us, and so we swapped things out, but no change otherwise. In the urban residential zone, we changed the side setback to 0 feet rather than a 5-foot setback. You can't actually do 0 feet unless you meet some building code, fire code protection standards, but in some places that could be done and meet that, and would allow for some zero lot line setbacks in those areas. We also had a build-to percentage requirement, and when we started doing the development testing, including actually right next door, the hotel next door, didn't meet any of the build-to percentages because of the way that it was articulating off of the front, the setback line along the street. And so we recognized that there was problems with those build-to percentages, and so we took that out in favor of the articulation and modulation requirements instead. We had setback exceptions that were applicable to Metro Everett, but then we We actually borrowed it from Citywide things, and then so as we talked with staff, we recognized that there were some issues with that we'd have two different setback standards, exceptions, and so what we've drafted is that those standards now will be applicable citywide. Those setback exceptions will be citywide. Some more changes in Chapter 20. We had a meeting with development community and other feedback afterwards about upper floor modulation. Originally, it started at floor 5. We proposed to change that to floor 6 to increase it one more floor before the upper floor modulation starts. And then there is no mandate for modulation at floors 8+. Previously, we had so at floor 6, you have to have a 10-foot setback at floor 6. Previously, at floors 8+, you had another 10-foot setback. So now at 8+, we don't have that additional 10-foot setback, but it is subject to a review process 2 and design review, so we're looking for modulation and articulation of those designs, and so we took that out of there. In the height maps, 2 changes primarily. First off is that in the core, the base height is proposed to be raised to 12 floors from 7. And this is meant as an incentive through the year 2025, and so we have a sunset date at the end of 2025 to try to incentivize people to build taller sooner within that area, and then some of the Metro height incentive things would come back into play. As mentioned earlier, the incentive height in the Norton Grand Historic Overlay area is lowered to 6 floors. For the height incentives, again, this is some of the feedback we had received. We eliminated caps on how many floors you could get. Previously, for example, in a public art program, you can only get 1 or 2 floors of additional height. Now you can get as much height as you're willing to go into the incentive program. And we increased the ratios significantly in quite a few different areas to try to make sure that the incentives work as incentives. We had some review of some projects and tied to the open space requirements, and so we have reduced the open space requirements for multifamily development for studio and 1-bedroom, recognizing that the smaller household sizes will typically not require as much open space, and so we've reduced that. And then we have a provision to allow 25% to be in active indoor recreation. In Chapter 34, the off-street parking, we did some adjustment for the space requirements for a couple uses, including entertainment, places of worship, and schools. As already mentioned, we amended the Metro parking area A map. And for bike parking, we reduced the amount of bike parking required for multifamily from 50% of the units to 40% of the units, and adjusted some of the language regarding where it had to be placed. Rather than being so specific, we just asked for a plan. In the off-street parking, also the location of parking, we address what happens when it's in a historic overlay. Our existing historic overlays have other standards for where parking can be located, and so trying to make sure the historic overlay standards are in place. And then we addressed how the paved surface is addressed for the parking within the required parking areas. And the last one is drive-up facilities. We put some language in there about the limits between the building and street, trying to make sure that we basically don't have those drive-up facilities in front yards, in front of buildings, and really kind of on the backside of buildings. So that brings us to the next steps. Public hearing, what we're requesting is the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing on June 5th on all 8 actions. And we're ready to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, David. Great overview. Lots of work. Any questions of the staff before we hear from the audience?
Could I just get a little more clarification on what was changed for the port compatibility component you mentioned? There was alterations, and I would just love to kind of get a little comparison of before and after.
So the port compatibility, we just have removed everything. So we had language in both the plans, some policies, maps, and we had some, we actually, some of the development regulations that we were doing was on the separate ordinance, and so we put a hold on all that, so. So it's just, it's all gone now, this time.
David, on the parking, maybe I've missed it, but I didn't see things like ride share and that type of parking.
So we have reductions for parking for things like ride share and things like that. So that's part of our incentive program that we have.
I got you. I understand that, but where are they going to park? Where would they be able to park?
They would be treated as, if it's on the street, none of this stuff has to do with the on-street parking, but if it's off-street, they would be treated as a parking lot, along with any other types of uses. So if it was fleet for ride share, for example, they would be considered a commercial parking lot, and they would have to meet the commercial parking lot standards.
Even if it may be inside of a building?
Well, if it's
Let's say
inside of a
somebody's
building.
putting up 8 stories of apartments and they want,
There would be nothing that we would prohibit. That would be an accessory use that would be allowed as part of that.
thank you.
Commissioner Zelinski.
I just had a question on your table 20-6, which is on page 17 in the booklet. This is under the development regulations regarding building form and design standards. And my question has to do with, and by the way, I like what you did with your little charts here to show what your little cross-section to show what it is you're regulating. So in the table there, you have illustration A, B, and C, which have to do with the ground floor elevation, the finished ceiling height, and the building depth on the ground floor. And my question is, what are the purposes in regulating these kinds of dimensions? I was just kind of curious, as, building height, of course, we have a long history of regulating that, but some of these other dimensions, I was just curious as to what our purpose was in regulating those.
Well, for some of them, so the building heights for the ground floor is to try to get that presence and have the building design at the street front. And so in the Metro core, try to make sure that the buildings have a little bit more of a, I don't know the proper term, a little more stately presence within there. With the depth, one of the concerns is trying to make sure that there's enough depth in the building so that we have active uses there, because we do allow some things to, like structure parking and some other things, to be behind it, and so we want to make sure there's a real viable use that's there for some minimum depth dimensions.
So that would be for a use other than parking, for instance,
Correct.
depth?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I get that. One little minor thing, you call B the finished ceiling height, but your little chart, your little sketch, cross-section sketch, doesn't show it as, it shows it as floor to floor.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's just a little minor correction there.
Good catch.
Wanted to show you I was doing some reading. I'm sure there's other things I may not have caught, but.
Yeah.
Keep reading.
Commissioner Lark.
Just so I can get a better understanding, you mentioned earlier that you switched from a build to percentage to an articulation requirements. Can you explain a little bit more about thoughts behind that, kind of why that switch was made? I'm not too familiar with